Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We're marking the Mental Health Awareness Week by this webinar that we will be talking about mental health and core engineering. So we'll wait a few seconds while people joining us because I could see the numbers of people joining. Okay, well, thank you for joining us. So we won't run over the time. We'll make a start. And first thing, I will introduce our speakers for today. Paula Casagrande, the structural director and building at Trumbull. She's also a first aider. Jamie Chestnut, the director of Ancora. Andrew Leask, the director at Rogers Leask Ltd, and Simon Hockton, the founder of Unseen Aware. And this is just our copyright for the day. So if you want to familiarize yourself with what that kind of like mean for you. So shall we get our first speaker, Paula Casagrande?
Hi,
Hello,
everybody.
Paula.
Hi, everybody. Hi.
So I just want to say something here quickly that Paula is going to be slightly different format. I'll stop sharing my screen. It's going to be slightly different format to our other speakers because I'm going to ask Paula a few questions about her being a mental health first aider, and she's going to respond to me like in a podcast. And the other speaker will have a slightly different format. So first, hi Paula, it's great to have
Hi.
you here today. And my first question to you: you are a mental health first aider. What does this mean?
So, yeah, I'm a mental health first aider, and we provide initial support and assistance to individual that maybe experiences mental health challenges or crises. Just to be clear, I'm not a mental health professional like a therapist, but I've been trained to recognize signs and symptoms of common mental health problems, and I provide appropriate support until professional help is available. And I do typically practice this in the workplace with for my colleagues. Um, my intervention may involve active listening, providing a safe and non-judgmental space for the person to talk. I offer empathy, I offer reassurance. I would support my colleagues by signposting available help, like we have an employee assistance program, for example. I offer suggestion for self-care strategies. And if they want, I help them to raise the issue internally with the relevant parties, say a manager, colleague, or HR, or even I do so on their behalf. I would like to stress that I totally understand and respect the importance of confidentiality and the privacy of the individuals I assist. And I would not disclose personal information or talk to other people or about their circumstances without their consent. So it's always very, very confidential. I would only do so in situation where I'm trained to recognize if there's a risk of harm, and therefore I may reach out to flag that. But actually, this has never happened to me. So I totally respect the privacy and the confidentiality.
Thank you, Paula. And how can you become a mental health first aider?
Um, there's many accredited courses available to become a mental health first aider. They may be delivered online or in person. Myself, I've attended a training course in 2019. It was a 2-day course. It was paid for by Ramble, as my employer, and I have to say, it was really timely because shortly after we had the challenges of COVID in 2020, and those skills were very useful in dealing with the stress of the situation. And then a few years later, I attended a refresher course, which was a day-long one, just to keep my knowledge and skills up to date. I would like to signpost that the iStruct actually provides a mental health first aider course every year. And there's going to be, I think, a QR code shared at the end of the webinar if you want to sign up for that. And I think it's going to be, a link is going to be included in the pack. There's going to be a pack of additional information released after the event.
Okay, so can you share something of your experience as a mental health first aider in the workplace with us today?
Yes, of course. I would say that people reach out to me for a variety of reasons. Of course, a big one is work-related stress, which over a prolonged period of time can lead to burnout. Andy Lisk later will discuss the work side of things in a bit more detail later on, so I'm not going to talk too much about it now. But I want also to say that personal circumstances may also play a significant role. It can be that work is fine and not overwhelming at all, but in combination with what goes on at home, it becomes too much. Or in itself, the situation at home may be overwhelming. And this can be health worries, financial worries, care responsibilities, a relationship breakdown, bereavement, all sorts of factors. Um, and it is important to acknowledge that it's okay not to be okay. And I would really like to get to the point where raising the issue of struggling with mental health and reaching out for help is no different from saying that I'm struggling because I had a bad back or any other physical ailment. And I really hope that this kind of conversation will help normalizing this conversation. Personally, I find that quite often the colleagues that reach out to me are from other offices. Sometimes I've not met them before and may not talk to them again afterwards. Um, I guess this is because it may feel easier for them to talk to someone detached from their day-to-day job, and that's absolutely fine. Um, we got a reasonably big mental health first aider team at Ramble, and it's quite diverse. So we got mental health first aiders in different offices, different backgrounds, different grades. So people have got a choice who they feel most comfortable to reach out to. Sometimes it's just one call where I listen, signpost the available resources, and that's enough to help them. Sometimes I follow up and I keep talking to them as many times as it's needed until I feel comfortable that the individual got things in place and getting help or is feeling better. In any case, I always try to make sure that the individuals feel safe, feel reassured, and most importantly, in control of the process of what they would like to happen next, and they feel until they feel better.
That's a great, also it's a lot of responsibility.
Mhm.
I have another question is like you mentioned burned out. Can you explain a bit more about this and what can anyone do to prevent or address it?
Yes, so burnout is not quite a medical condition, but it's been classified as an occupational phenomenon by the World Health Organization. And it is defined as a syndrome that results from chronic workplace stress that's not been successfully managed. So you got workplace stress, and then over time, if not dealt with, it becomes burnout. And it's characterized by feelings of feeling with no energy, exhausted, um, distance from the job, feeling negative, not very efficient. The difference with stress is normally short term, but the prolonged stress can lead to burnout. And I have to say that typically it's a lot more difficult to bounce back from burnout than is from this short-term stress. So the best way is to actually address it when it's still in the short term, and try to not to let it build up. Um, in terms of preventing it, taking care of oneself helps mitigate the risk of burnout. And I put this as a first measure because it's something that we can all control as individuals, more than we can control, say, work demands, deadlines, work pressure, but we can always take care of ourselves. And that means engaging in activities that promotes physical and mental well-beings, and they go together. For example, exercise, hobbies, relaxation techniques, healthy lifestyle like proper nutrition, sleep, hydration. Um, Taking regular breaks during the day can improve the focus and productivity, and helps prevent burnout. And this is particularly true in the post-COVID ways of working. That's like we are always on call, seems to be always on call. Everything is a pace that's, even if it's possible, even faster pace than it was before COVID. Um, and equally is crucial to maintain a healthy life balance between work and personal life. And breaks, holidays, can help recharge. And I know what you're thinking is like, oh, there's never a good time to take a break. I can't go on holiday. I can't possibly stop because of the fast pace of project delivery and the nature of the work that we do. But it is essential to get rest and recuperation in order to stay physically and mentally healthy. Um, in the workplace, obviously, looking after ourselves, but actually then try to address it in the workplace. So, for example, discussing challenges with a manager can be helpful. They may offer guidance or provide additional resources which can help alleviate the pressure. It's also important for if you're for employers out there, it's to train people manager to recognize and address the workplace stress, because it often happens that you are such a great engineer and great at coming up with structured solutions that actually I'm going to put you in charge now of people, and that's not automatically translate into being a great engineer into a great people manager. So we need to train our people managers um, to be able to deal with workplace stress. Um, there are other types of confidential support available. For example, larger organization have got employees assistance programs. Um, you can have stress management workshops, private health insurance. That type of help can also be helpful. Although trying to address it earlier rather than wait until you really need treatment is a much better way of going about it.
Yeah. So, what are the other types of support available? As not all organizations are large enough to be able to provide this kind of support you talked about.
That's a very good question. It's a very fair point. And that's why I mentioned first that taking care of oneself is important. That's something that everyone can do. Um, but I acknowledge that if you're a small organization or a sole trader, you may not be able to put in place lots of mental health first aiders like in a large organization. So I would say that you can find support also through professional organizations. So seeking support from peers, mentors, professional networks can reduce the feeling of isolation and get feeling of being supported. Um, the STRIP, for example, offers resources and networking opportunities through the groups. So, for example, regional groups or the recently launched STRIP community group. Obviously, through membership, you can also access professional development courses, online forums, mentoring programs, and I think there's going to be a link shared later about this. Benevolent fund resources, so there's lots of opportunities there. Also, in somebody's personal life, you may want to speak to family or friends because they can offer emotional support and sometimes a different perspective on challenges. Although I appreciate sometimes we may not want to bring the worries home, and we like to keep home and work separate. So if you don't want to bring it home, maybe seeking advice from a mentor outside the immediate work environment can also be a good idea. Um, and if you can't manage your short-term stress and it builds up into burnout, then there's support groups in person or online that can provide a sense of community and a shared understanding from people that go under they're experiencing the same type of burnout and therefore can support each other.
Well, thank you. What advice can you give to those who are not trained mental health first aiders but would like to create a supportive environment in the workplace?
Uh, Really, anyone can be a supportive colleague, and you can do so by checking in and asking your colleague if they're okay. Um, just look out for changes in their behavior. Like, for example, somebody is usually bubbly and very extrovert. They become withdrawn, or they have snappier responses, or you notice changes in physical appearance, or people stopping, putting their camera on when they're on calls. That kind of change. And my advice is remember to always ask twice. if they're okay. People are a lot more likely to open up when asked the second time. Be a good listener. Don't judge. Don't minimize their feelings. What may seem trivial to you may be a very big deal burdening them. And I would also like to remind people to check symptoms on themselves. Like, for example, if you start, lack of appetite, becoming more tearful, needed more time to take more time off work, sleeping badly. If we see this in ourselves, we should seek help. Although I do know by personal experience that it is a lot easier to see it in others and suggest others to reach out for help than to admit to yourself that you need help. But it's really essential that we keep assessing ourselves and don't bury these symptoms, because the statistics of the impact on work-related stress in our industry are quite bad due to the pressure that we are under in our profession, as Andy will talk about later. So I really hope that this has been useful prompts and tips for thinking about our and our colleagues' mental health. And there will be links to additional I3T resources and material that will be shared after the event. So thank you very much for listening, and over to Jamie now.
There we go. Thank you, Farah. That was really interesting. And I'm going to pick up on a couple of your themes later on as well, particularly around burnout. I'll share a personal story on that. So I'm going to talk about why we should care about mental health, and to introduce myself and who am I to talk about this. So I'm Jamie. I'm a director at Jungtura. We do cultural change around safety, and that's mental and physical safety, but also around allyship, inclusion, well-being programs, and masculinity. So some really interesting conversations there. I'm the co-chair of the Men's Network for Equal Engineers. We're a new network, and the aim of the Men's Network is to promote actively role modeling, good behaviors, mental health, particularly for men. It's a difficult topic. We're not very good at talking about it. So we aim to do that as Equal Engineers. I am also the COO for the International Marine Contractors Association. We're a membership trade body. We've got 800 and something companies around the world as members for us, and we do individual training as well as corporate. And to be clear, I'm speaking to you here on behalf of both Jungtura and Equal Engineers, and not as IMCA, but it's good to share that. I'm an engineer. I'm not an HR professional. I'm talking about mental health from an engineering point of view. So it's quite good to start with data, because we're engineers, we love data. So I'm going to put a few slides up with some information. I'm not going to read out every bullet, but I will talk around where some of the data comes from and why it matters. What I aim to do is frame why we should care about mental health and where the challenge is before going into what comes next and what we do about it. So this data comes from the HSE's 2024 annual report. There's lots of good stuff in there about physical health. We've all done that for years and we've talked about it. There's a lot more coming out about mental health, which is great. So at the moment, there are about 4.2 million people claiming benefits, at least one health-related benefit, which is up from 3.2 million in 2019. Of that, mental health represents 41% of benefit claims. So it's quite a high proportion of benefit claims is around mental health. The bit that troubles me, I guess, is the younger population, the 25-year-olds, the Gen Z. It's about 69% of their claims are around mental health, and their sector is rising. It makes me wonder if we are kind of the Generation X and the boomers running our companies and we've set them up to work in particular ways. What is it that we're doing in our companies that are making our younger generations feel a lot more uncomfortable and finding stress in places we may not have done? We work differently, we think differently, we like hierarchies and rules as a kind of elder generations. Our younger generations do not. So are we moving our companies forwards? We'll come back to some of that later. But the cost of these benefits is huge to the country. And imagine if you're a company, you've got people off sick. We'll talk about that in a minute. Wouldn't it be nice that if you can have some of this time back, some of these people who are on benefits could add amazing value to your companies? They've got skills and talents we're just not getting the best out of. They're on benefits instead. It'd be great to get some of these people in. So from an employer's point of view, we should be doing our bit to try and bring them in. And of interest, apparently, according to various chatbots that I've searched, There's about 3,400 mental health charities in the UK. So a lot of people who, when we do break them in our companies or in their personal lives, there's a lot of support out there. But again, wouldn't it be nice if we looked after our people so they don't get to need all those charities? So that's the kind of the top level HSE bit. But some of the research on mental health that I've picked up on, there was a survey of 1,800 small and medium enterprises. This was done by CIPD, and they took out the average number of sick days taken in 2019 was 81. By the time they resurveyed in 2023, it had gone up to 128. That's a lot of productivity, and ultimately it's affecting your profits and bottom line. So even if mental health wasn't top of your list, there's a benefit to your company of investing in it. Now, clearly mental health, I believe, should be at the top of our list. We should look after our people. But look at all of that productivity lost, the profits lost. Another interesting statistic that I found, churn is quite high. The average salary for a 25k person across the UK, if we change that person's about 30k. That comes from a Future Engineering report. The aim of that was looking at recruiting costs, but also loss of productivity from the person leaving to the person joining, the management time to settle new people in, the training, the overheads. Wouldn't it be great if we could retain our staff, keep them happy, they don't want to leave in the first place? Wouldn't that be great? Bring that churn down. And of course, when people do leave and we say, why are you leaving? It was found in one survey that 32% were citing company culture. What does that mean? That stress. We hear it in most of our companies, I'm sure. We're just going to do a bit more with less. We might not recruit some people to replace you, but you know what? We're going to do 10% more this year. We're putting stress on people. We're changing our ways of working. We are not as flexible as we could be. In some areas, I come from manufacturing. My team are in the factory 5 days a week. They haven't got a choice. And we as managers are at home 2 or 3 days a week. Children running around in the background, life's great. Are we thinking about how we present as managers to our people who have to be on the factory floor, for example? It's no wonder some of them don't like what we do. So there's some interesting statistics saying we probably aren't looking after our people as well as we should. At Equal Engineers, we run a survey. We've done 2 so far called Masculinity in Engineering, one in 2018, one in 2022. We're currently running one. It's just closed, so we will be producing our 2025 data. Picking out on mental health particularly, it's an area we ask questions around. Over 4 in 5 engineers experience emotional or mental health issues at work. Most of those people won't talk about it with their employers. They're more likely to talk to their colleagues, but even the numbers aren't high. So we know that people are slightly isolated, slightly disconnected. When they're having problems, they don't know who to turn to. They don't know where to go with that. And we're finding that this data over the last couple of years has gone up. It'll be interesting to see what we learn this year. But my gut feel is that it's probably not going to go back down again. So we're starting to recognize that people in engineering are feeling this problem. Of that, when you look at it, 41% are having fair or poor mental health compared to physical health, which is reported 27%. So more people are reporting now that we've got worse mental health. The good and the great, there's not that many people feeling amazing. I wish there were. What can we do about that? We all know our colleagues are suffering from stress, even if we don't see it in ourselves. There are people walking around going, no, I'm all right. But, my colleagues, they're not doing so well. And they'll be looking at you going, no, he's a bit stressed. She's a bit stressed. What does that look like? Aggression. Sadly, that's sitting at 44% of people are reporting they've got aggression. Physical, emotional, sexual, so that's impacting on our mental health. And a quarter of your employees have taken time off for stress. Wouldn't it be nice if they were turning up to work, helping you with your productivity and your output? They'd be more engaged, they'd be happier. We've got a problem to fix. For my own personal journey, I've had fair or poor mental health in a few of the jobs I've been through. In one particular case, referring to what Paola's just been talking about, I ended up in a position of burnout. I didn't see it coming. My colleagues did, my family did, my friends did. They saw me getting more tired, more stressed. I was getting into a burnout position. I carried on working. I thought I was doing all right. I was not doing the best of my team or myself. And when I finally came to that conclusion and sort of started talking about it more openly, family and friends going, oh yeah, no, we saw this happening. It's like, you didn't tell me. So I've been there. I know what it's like to suffer from poor mental health. And I wasn't talking about it with people. this is a slightly difficult slide, and it will relate to a conversation we're going to have later with Andy a bit. But the considering self-harm or even considering taking their own lives, engineering research has shown that a quarter of engineers talk about or think about self-harm or even taking their own lives. This is self-reported on a survey. There were over 1,000 respondees, and it's across all sectors of engineering. 20% know someone who's taken their own life. I lost somebody in my team a few years ago. It's really difficult to deal with. You know, and males are 3 times more likely to consider self-harm or die by suicide than females. That's not because there's 3 times as many males in engineering. It's of those considering self-harm or going through with it, males are 3 times more likely to die by suicide than women. So all of the issues we talk about having poor mental health, if we don't look after our staff, don't look after our people, worst case, it ends up in something like this. And we know in construction, there was a great campaign a couple of years ago. They built an amazing high-vis vest on the side of a tall building out of 683 small high-vis jackets representing all the people that took their own lives that year. It was a very powerful image, a very moving image, a very tragic image. But there was a great campaign to try and highlight it. But we know it comes from disconnectedness, from loneliness, from not talking about things. It's a really difficult place to be. So, you know, we've gone through some statistics and shared why we should care. There's a problem out there. We're not very good at talking about it. What I actually want to focus on is a little bit more the positives on what we can do about it. And I put a series of questions about psychological safety. Have you got somewhere you can talk and you feel safe doing so? And if you read down about open culture, do you share it and you support it? The reason I think the answer is yes. As engineers, particularly in construction, in structural engineering, in manufacturing and engineering, we have a really good physical health and safety system. If you see a trip hazard, you'll probably report it. If you see someone on a ladder without a hard hat or somebody at the base, you're probably going to report it. We already have a safe space and an open culture where you'll walk into your team and say, I saw 3 things. We really need to look after our people better. You'll put it down on a report. Your management will go through it. You may well look at it yourself. You'll put some measures in place. You'll make it better. You as members of staff and your teams feel safe opening up about it. They feel happy talking about it. But we don't do that in the mental space. We don't do that. We don't look out for our colleagues and think, hang on a minute, some of my colleagues are suffering. Let's report it and talk about it. We don't feel we can go to our bosses and talk about it. But you do for your physical systems. So how do we bring that mental and physical piece together? How do you look after your teams in the same way? What does that look like? So I'd say you've already got this in your systems. You might be viewing it just through one lens, which leads to my point at the bottom. I'm an engineer and I'm an operator. I lead these conversations for my team. I'm not an HR professional, but I took ownership of my wellbeing programs, which I'll talk about in a minute. I took ownership of our mental health. I started to integrate it with our safety systems. I started to bring an engineering systematic kind of approach to things. My engineering teams, my manufacturers, my workforce can relate a lot more to a engineering system than they could an HR program. We know that from data. That's not a criticism of HR. They run some amazing work and I could not do my job without them. But my authenticity as an engineer by leading it was a lot easier for my team to look at than an HR professional leading it. So by working with HR, but leading the conversation, we managed to merge our mental and physical a lot more closely. So you do have a safe space. Your team will start coming forwards and talking about it. It's really important. We talk about masculinity, and do you have a stereotypical masculine culture? I am not talking about the toxic masculinity and the hypermasculinity and the things that we see in the press. I'm talking about stereotypical masculine cultures. And we're all told don't stereotype, but bear with me because I think it's quite valuable that as men in particular, we're not particularly good at talking about mental health. We don't really open up about how we're feeling. Paola's point, ask twice, how are you feeling? He might tell you the second time. Quite a few men probably won't tell you on the 4th or 5th time, but the football was great last night, wasn't it? You know what? And let's talk about something else. You know, so if you look at construction, why did so many people take their lives? Why is that a difficult place? Even with a workforce on site, they didn't feel they could open up. They didn't feel they could talk about mental health because we don't do that. We're men. We don't talk about emotions. We therefore have an expectation of how we're going to behave. What if we talked about that? What if we said it's okay not to behave that way? What if it's all right to be a little bit more emotional, a bit more open? You know, what is a good masculine behavior? Some of those features that we have are really good in male and female. Let's take the best of both of those. Let's not talk about masculine, feminine. Let's just look after each other, which is why a male network or support group is quite important. We have great networks and resource groups for lots of different groups out there. You know, at lunchtime today, I popped into a women in technology group to see a few people. What an amazing support group, and women in technology have somewhere to go. But what about a man in technology? If we're not very good at opening up, how do you make a safe space? How do you have that little group in there? It doesn't have to be, you know, 85% of your company are male, so let's just make it all about the men. I'm not saying that. But if we could bring people together and have a safe space that a few of us could lead, say, if you're having problems, come to us, come and chat. And do you have an ally? What does that look like? So we as men are good allies for women in some cases, or for disabilities, as Simon will talk about later, or, you know, whichever groups we support. But if we aren't looking after our mental health, if we're not looking after ourselves very well, if we're not doing a good job of being honest about who we are and where we're at, we're going to be rubbish allies. So how do we fix ourselves? We draw on the resources of those who are really good at it. And some of the resource groups you may have in your companies are probably doing a really good job of supporting each other. What if they were our allies? Help us open up as a conversation. We'd be a much better ally as a result. So we're in it together. There's no us and them. There's no you and me. There's no, you know, your group, my group. Help each other. Bring it together. Have a single support network. Make it safe. In my last job, I introduced a well-being program. As I said, I had high churn, high absentee rates, high stress rates. I had lots of problems with my teams. And so we lost one of my team members. So I introduced a program to address each of those things. I'm not going to go into the full details here, but it was a really good 3-year program that did start to address stress. We made the personal responsibilities. How do we look after ourselves? And then how do you look after your teams? Part of that was building connections. I've talked about construction being a lonely industry. What if we build connections? It's more than just being on site together or talking on teams together. It's about building genuine connections. To Paola's point of asking twice and having that face-to-face, what does that look like? Mental health first aid, I fully agree. You know, great resources, amazing people offering lots of value. But I'm going to share a resource at the end with Every Mind at Work, an amazing company who do training and support to mental health first aid. Their research shows that less than 20% of mental health first aid programs are effective. It's not the individuals, they're very good people, but we're not managing our programs right. We're not supporting our teams right. So whilst individual conversations are brilliant, we're not bringing it together. So there's work to be done in that space. I'm not going to go into detail here, but there's more to be done. And help groups, there's some really important groups out there. There's Andy's Man Club, there's Samaritans. There are networks like ours and plenty others. It's all about finding the right help that suits you. It might not suit everybody, but find something that works for us. Help connect our teams together. If we can't do it individually because we're small companies or you haven't got time, find groups that can, Equal Engineers, for example. So it's about building that support. It's about building a network around you, helping your teams be comfortable. Because if we're going to lead the conversation and talk about it, our teams are much more likely to talk about it too. So look, I could talk about mental health for days, and with some companies I do. I really enjoy it. I'm really passionate about doing it from an engineering point of view. As I said, from my point of view from Intura, I do conferences and events. I help companies with cultural change. I try and bring safety together with mental and physical health. Equal Engineers, from a men's network point of view, we're a new network we're starting to form. Follow us, find us, link in with us. We're on Circle as well. You can follow our lectures on mental health, on role modeling, on masculinity, and we can help with those conversations. And I've mentioned Every Mind at Work. I know that the Institute of Structural Engineers do first aid as well, but their research is quite good. Their support is quite good. And if you're trying to set up one in your company, finding that resources and seeing how it works is really important. So I'm going to stop there and pass over to Simon. I hope that's useful to you. I'm happy to take questions at the end and see where I can help people as we go. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Simon.
On the screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. Yeah, Jamie mentioned a number of different things that I'm going to touch on. I talked about the fact that a lot of their colleagues are not telling, or a lot of people are not telling their colleagues that they are suffering with mental health. So we're going to touch on that. So I'm going to talk about masking. I know you can see the picture of me with a mask. That's not the kind of mask I'm talking about. I'm deaf, so you might be able to see the fact that I've said it on the screen. I wear hearing aids and I lip read. But I'm talking about something different today because of the situation we're in. It's Mental Health Awareness Week. We're talking about masking. So what is it, and how can we actually reduce that in your organisation? So this is a picture I got off the internet. This is no one in particular, but let's just call her Louise. Okay, so Louise is smiling. She has depression. So she suffers from a mental health condition, but she's always cheerful. She's frequently smiling, she's joking, she's always acting upbeat, even when she feels miserable inside. She overcommits, so she's always taking on all the extra responsibilities to distract herself from being alone with the thoughts that makes the depression worse a particular type of day. So she's always volunteering to do things. She's always staying busy. So she's always seen to be productive, and she's a social butterfly, and she's always on the go. And she's using that as a coping mechanism. She avoids deep conversations. So she doesn't want to talk about what's going on back home. She doesn't want to talk about how she's feeling. But she might ask questions about, what people are doing tomorrow evening, or look at the state of the kitchen, or wasn't that a great meeting we had? She's trying to distract from talking about the things that maybe she should be thinking about. And she's always maintaining like a perfect image. She's always highly competent, always put well together. And that's to deflect suspicion that something might not be quite right. Okay, so that is what masking is all about. So what is masking? Okay, well, it's when someone hides or suppresses aspects of their personality, behaviors, or emotions to conform to social expectations or norms. So basically, she's trying to fit in the case of Louise, as an example, or anyone with a hidden disability or condition. They're trying to make themselves not stand out. They want to look like they belong, and they don't want to have people questioning that they might be struggling. Okay, but what's the point of all that? Why should organisations care? Well, Jamie pointed out some interesting statistics. And he talked a lot about the fact that there's, productivity benefits, and there's lack of people who, if you're not talking to your manager, if you're not talking to your colleagues, what are you doing? Now, Jamie had some really great statistics, which are highly valid, highly reliable. I don't. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a screen. I did some of my own research. It was a poll on LinkedIn about 4 weeks ago. And I asked this question. And I said, how less productive do you think you've been in your role due to the need to mask your disability or condition? So whatever it might be, it was about hidden rather than visible. So how less productive do you think you've been in your role due to the need to mask? And these are the results. So what you can see here is that if you look at the very bottom one, 1 in 5 people said that they were less productive around about 50% of their working day due to the fact they have to mask. So we talked about Louise before, busy, staying constant, so making sure she's productive, forcing that cheerfulness, making sure she's smiling. She's actively having to do that. It's not coming natural. She's masking the condition of the fact that she's feeling so depressed about something that's going on in her life. And 72% ranges from 10% to 50% of less productivity. So up to 4 hours a day is being lost by an individual because they're having to mask. I would say personally, for me, with my hearing loss and my mental health at times has been impacted, and it may be something that we'll talk about in the Q&A at the end, I would say it's about 25%. Where there was, and been picked up by Paolo and Jamie as well, around psychological safety, where I've worked in environments where psychological safety wasn't there, or it didn't feel safe to tell people about how I was feeling as a deaf person struggling in a a workshop, for example, or a large meeting, I would say I was losing about 2 hours a day. About 25% of my time was less productive. Now, just to give you in perspective, not all about mental health, but disabilities in general. So that's kind of giving you a flavour of the impact. And I think a lot of it does back up with what Jamie was saying earlier, with the statistics that he had, which are far more reliable and valid than these. It's just a straw poll, but it is quite stark when you look at them. So what can organisations do to address this? You know, because we talked about the fact that productivity, that's bottom line impact. So what can organisations do? They can't just simply say, well, we're not going to employ anybody who has a hidden disability, because A, it's illegal, but secondly, we're already here. The 20% of the population has a hidden disability or condition. So that's 20% on average. 20% of your employees in your organisation will have a hidden disability or condition. And actually, in engineering, it's actually a lot higher. So, you know, it's something that they have to address, but how can they do that? Well, I'm just going to propose one particular solution. That's something that I'm involved in. But first of all, what would your employees think, say, or do when engaging with others? That could be colleagues, that could be visitors, it could be customers, when engaging with someone who has a hidden disability. So a lot of it tends to be, well, I'm concerned about what they're going to say. I don't want to embarrass the person. I don't want to insult them. And so often they don't say anything, because that's the easiest thing. But there are, you know, implications of doing so. First one is that you've got your image and reputation. Who wants to work for an organisation which is psychologically unsafe, because people don't want to look after their staff and don't care about the high suicide rate, for example, in an organisation? The employee experience, which is, you know, you're going to have high staff turnover if they're not feeling like they're going to be belonging and looking after each other. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, productivity. So one way of doing this, there's many different solutions. One thing that I'm involved in is something called Unseen Aware. It's a social enterprise to try and create that inclusive experience for those people who have a hidden disability or condition. Now, I'm sure you've probably come across the Sunfair lanyard. This is slightly different, but it works in conjunction with that. Ultimately, what we're doing is creating sustained awareness and impact, focused on what I like to call little and often. And if you have things that are delivered to you little and often, rather than a great big chunk at the beginning of the day, for example, like a one-day workshop, then you're going to get higher retention because there's not much to absorb, and you're going to be less overwhelmed because, you know, you just have to focus on that short piece nugget, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So how does that work? Well, first of all, you're going to learn the principles of being an unseen disabilities ally. Things like respectful communication, not making assumptions, challenging bias and stereotypes, always speaking up. To be a good ally, what you need, you learn that. And then you get given a badge. You probably can't see this on the screen, but it looks a little bit like that. And the idea is then kind of tells other people in your organisation that you, or the person with the badge, has got a greater level of understanding about hidden disabilities, and you can approach them in a way that will be much more suited if you need to. It doesn't stop there. The next bit is that you'll receive weekly emails with snippets of lived experience interviews. We've done about 20 so far. That's ongoing. I did one with a traumatic brain injury earlier this week. A couple of weeks' time, I'm doing somebody who has Tourette's. And we've done a range of different interviews, but you get a small amount every single week, on average 5 minutes. But it's easy enough to watch it on the way to work or in your lunch break. But you start to get that every week, where you start to feel like I'm getting ready to be able to help. And as a result of that building up, you develop the confidence and the empathy to have those conversations. And ultimately, Unseen Aware is trying to remove the fear of talking about hidden disabilities or conditions. Some of the people, just to give you a flavour here, we've got Paul in the top left-hand corner. He's 54. He was diagnosed with autism at 52. We've got Laura on the top right-hand side. She works in retail and she has chronic fatigue syndrome. Sam in the bottom right-hand side, he's profoundly deaf, he wears a cochlear implant, and he's signed. He can speak, but he signs as well in the interview. Solange, bottom left-hand side, she has borderline personality disorder, and she lives in Dubai. She's a D&I consultant. And then Ryan in the middle, he's a very successful lawyer in media, lives in Manchester, and he has retinitis pigmentosa, which is a vision impairment condition. And as I said, there's loads of others and that goes on. But it gives you a little bit of an insight into what it's like living with those conditions. If you'd like to learn more, then there's my details here. But with that, I'm going to hand you over to Andrew, and he's going to continue the conversation.
Thank you, Simon. I don't have slides, and going last is a mixed blessing. So I'll try not to repeat what's been said before. I'll try to add to it. I've worked in construction 52 years, 5 years in contracting and 47 in consultancy. Co-founded Rogers Leask in 1984, sold the business and continued to work in it. So I'm a fellow of the civils, fellow of the structures, chartered director, and a mental health first aider. So what brought mental health to my attention? In 2015, our youngest son, William, took his own life while studying maths at Bristol University. And I decided at that point that I'd got to do something to make a difference. So I've written articles for Structures magazine, for the Institute of Directors, for the Confederation of British Industry. I've written articles for local newspapers. I've been on breakfast TV talking about mental health, and I contributed to a paper written for the Prime Minister in 2016 titled Thriving at Work. So, but what I shall say is based on my observation. I'm not a mental health professional by any means. So the IOD asked me at one of the meetings to what my definition of mental health. So I said, well, my definition is that good mental health supports the processes that we want to follow or need to follow, and enables us to do them in a way that we find satisfactory. So statistics have already been mentioned. Statistics are hard to come by. And one of the measures that I've used for construction in particular is the suicide rate, sadly. Over the last 10 years, there have been 7,000 suicides in construction alone. It's the industry that is most prone to suicide. And it generally falls into two categories. Tradespeople in the mid to late 20s are most vulnerable, and professional people in the mid to late 40s. Now, why? Why construction? It's a combination of a lot of things. Long hours, pressure to deliver, compliance requirements, poor work-life balance, poor diets, alcohol, too much of it, lack of exercise, and job insecurity. So what do we do about that? In addition, actually, for SMEs, it's a lonely place leading a business. You're less likely to have support. So this year, the theme for Mental Health Awareness Week is community, which is my link into what the institutions can do, the professional institutions can do to help. So communities include work, families, sports clubs, and of course our professional institutions. So what can they do? What can the institutions do to help and support us? They have the means to generate publicity, education, to help change the culture, to remove the stigma around mental health. Connection, that is meetings, networking. We have branches, and also interconnecting the various institutions. So, but in terms of networking and meetings, we generally, as an institution, they tend to be fairly focused on technical matters. We need to broaden that to the wider issues affecting people. The institutions can offer direct support, but probably more importantly and more easily, signposting to support, to external support, and to encourage people to look after themselves. This has already been mentioned by Jamie. Look after themselves and to look after each other. Looking after each other can be hard because often we're doing that because of absenteeism or poor performance arising due to mental health issues. But we've got to invest the time in helping our colleagues, because in the long run, that will help. That will reduce the amount of support they require. And one day it might be us that needs that help. Supporting other organisations within our community can be good for our mental health. Within our own business, we encourage, or we allow and encourage each of our staff to have 2 days per year that they spend with a charitable organisation or social organisation. They find that very rewarding. I'm a trustee of a charity that provides counselling to bereaved children and bereaved parents, and I find that very rewarding. But when I've talked to a lot of people. I've talked to groups of construction people, and they may have been just dragged off site, and 30 tradespeople sat in front of me. They're sat there thinking, why are we doing this? Why have I been dragged off my job? I talk to them for a bit, and then one of them will start to open up, and then they all open up, and they've all got a story. And to me, that just demonstrates how talking can be beneficial. It links people, connects people, and it helps. In terms of talking to people who have been suicidal, pretty uniformly they say, I feel that I need to go, that people would be better off, families, work colleagues would be better off without me. And I think recognising when people are in that sort of place can be difficult. And some of those people that I've talked to have said, I appear to be the life and soul of the party, but I'm not inside. When I get into that dark place, I do believe that, as I say, people would be better off without me. So I think for all of these reasons, the institutions need to help us get talking to each other, to talk to other institutions, to create opportunities to talk outside the technical sphere that we normally operate in. So that's me done, and I'll hand back over to the team. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, everybody, for the nice insight and shared experience. I think it touched everybody of us. I think now I'll be handing over to Karina to take the Q&A.
Thank you, Ruwada. Thank you to all of our panelists. Unfortunately, we only have a short amount of time, 10 minutes, but don't worry, all of your questions that don't get answered by our panelists will get answered once we post our recording. So you have time to read through them. So kicking off with the first question, structural engineers are often celebrated for their precision, innovation, and ability to work under immense pressure. But what happens when things go wrong? How well equipped are we as a profession to support our members when they experience failure or make mistakes, not just technical, but emotional and psychologically? And how might we build a culture where seeking help is seen as a strength and not liability?
Shall I take that one first? I think this is something that we very much emphasize in our business, that it's okay to admit failure. and to talk about it. And I think, again, the institutions can help to promote that by to making it clear that we all make mistakes, things do go wrong. It's okay. It's how we learn, and we do learn. And things have gone wrong for centuries, and we've had to learn from them.
Yeah, if I can add, so and it ties into a question that Michael Roberts has added in the background as well, where we have professional responsibilities as a structural engineer or a chief engineer for an aircraft, in my case, where my signature sends an aircraft flying, or your signature would allow you to build a structure that, what if the building has a problem later? So there's a personal responsibility that adds to that pressure that makes it quite hard. But if I look at aviation, and this is where we can learn from other sectors, we already have a really good open safety culture. We've already got ways of sharing things that I think are more advanced than certainly marine or some of the construction I've worked in. It's about how do we learn from those industries where that open culture to put my hand up, and I've done it, I've made mistakes, we all have. And I'm able to walk into a room, put my hand up and go, you know what, I got that wrong. We shouldn't have done this. Here's why. Let's learn from it. Let's not do it again. And I didn't get the book thrown at me. I didn't get kicked out and fired. I didn't get, hung, drawn and quartered. I actually got treated with a bit of respect to say, thank you for admitting it. Well done for talking about it. Let's not do it again. Because most of us, when we make mistakes, really didn't mean to. So I would encourage us to look at different industries, the rail industry, the nuclear industry, the space industry, learn from each other, share our experiences. Things like this are really good for that. So, that's the sort of experience I have, and that's what I do.
I was just going to add to that is ultimately what we're all talking about is psychological safety and having the culture of psychological safety in the organizations. I was thrown off a project for a Big Four global management consultancy because I misheard an action and there was no psychological safety at that time. I'm sure it's different now, it's 20 years ago, but that's been with me the past 20 years. So yes, I think it's psychological safety for me would be the key way of describing what we've just talked about.
Thank you. I have a few interesting ones that are grouped, which are scenarios. So it's open to all panelists. What would your recommendations be to deal with the following? So an employee takes a sick leave to rest and recover, which they rarely do, and the employer keeps calling their personal phone and messaging them constantly, which kind of ties in with how would you say no politely to overwork and deal with your workload. And another one, which is more out there, is what to do when you're working with a narcissistic boss.
Can I just very briefly share my thoughts on this? It is difficult to sometimes to say no, but we all said it a few times now. It's all about the psychological safety and creating a culture in the workplace where that happens. But I get it. We're getting better, but not all workplaces are the same. So I'm very lucky. My workplace it's fine to talk about these type of issues in the same way that I talk about. Sorry, I got a bad back. I can't come to the office today or whatever. For me is if you need help in learning how to say no, because it's not easy and it's something that is to be learned, is to look for mentors or for guidance from others to learn to prioritize yourself. It's not easy, but yeah, it helps in the long term. It's about creating a safe space for saying no in the first place.
It is, Paola, if I can add to that, though, the questions are very good questions, but I'm looking at those questions through the lens of I'm an employee. I want to say no because you've asked me to do something, or I'm under pressure and I can't do it, or I'm not very well. If we as managers and leaders don't set the right culture, our employees can have these conversations, find mentors, but we have not made that safe space. Back to, Simon and Andy as well, talking about psychological safety. We as leaders have to change the culture of the company to allow it to be okay. If one of my employees says no to me, I shouldn't say, oh my God, just go and do it. I should be saying, thank you very much. I didn't realize you're under so much pressure. How do we have that conversation? But as managers, we're not leading those conversations. We're not prepared to change the culture of the company. We do on physical safety, we don't do on mental safety. So we as leaders have to drive this from the top. Our employees then won't be asking these questions because it's just going to be easy. It's going to be obvious. It's going to be natural. So it is really much a leadership challenge as I see it. We haven't got there yet.
Thank you very much. The next one is an even more difficult one, again, open to all panelists. Is how can we start to make more awareness in our workplace about mental health? Well,
by joining and sharing links to webinar like this, for example, and after the webinar, there's going to be a pack that comes out with links to, for example, links to the institution of structural engineer material on this and other materials that the other panelists have shared. So just don't be afraid of start the conversation. Lots of places do now safety moments at the beginning of meetings. It's fairly normal, and possibly people focus a lot more on the physical side of it. It's a really good opportunity to a safety moment to actually talk about mental health, and just don't be afraid of saying, I've been to this webinar, this is what they say, what do you think about it, and talk about it.
I just want to add to that, actually. I think the next step, so it's awareness, and then the next step is creating that psychological safety, but getting leaders to step up and say, I have this condition, or I've struggled with this in the past, and that normalizes it for everyone else in the organization. If the leaders can't admit stuff, then sure as hell the team aren't going to do it either. So yes, it's important that the leaders do the right thing and demonstrate the right behaviors that they want their staff to do as well. And that means standing up and saying, do you know what? I'm human, I'm struggling as well. Yeah.
That's a really good one. So be open as a leader in the first place and show that it's okay to say you're not okay as a leader. Then the other will also think, okay, I can also say it. So lead by example.
Yeah.
And last point to add for that would be bringing the right people in to support you. Having conversations about mental health is difficult. You know, Andy, that was a very powerful conversation we had, and you know what you're sharing, hearing that will make people listen in a way that you may not get it otherwise. So we as companies can't always do it on our own. You know, finding the right conversations from the right people, whether it is Unseen Aware or whether it's Andy or whether it's me or somebody else. How can you get help? What does that look like? Bring in someone who can talk your language is a really good starting point. You can't do it without. You can have a go, but it's going to be a lot easier if you bring the right people in, and there are a lot of people out there that can help.
I get small groups of our people together and talk to them. We'll just say, we're going to talk about mental health. And the reactions vary. Some will just say, it's private, I'm not going to talk about it. And others will actually open up. And sometimes it's quite surprising, the ones who do open up and have issues that you would never have imagined.
Well, thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for the questions. But again, do not be worried. We will answer those after this webinar. In the meantime, we have been talking a lot about the resources, so I will share with you. Thank you all for attending our webinar. As you can see here, the recording will be made available in the next few weeks on the iStruct resource page. And in it, you'll find all the links that our speakers referred to, as well as these QR codes that could lead you to find useful articles such as mental health at work and how to support and all the different viewpoints. Also, this is the course that was mentioned by Paula as a mental health first aider. It is run in October, and there is an application deadline in September. So it's quite popular. So make sure you put in your application soon. The next one is our mentoring platform. As Andy mentioned, is all about creating community, and through Elevate, you could become a mentor or a mentee and be matched with like-minded individuals to help you on your journey. And finally, we also have support provided through the Benevolent Fund. So thank you again for watching, and hope everyone has a nice evening.